Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Rebecca Brandstetter, and I am thrilled to have Zaretta Hammond here for this episode of Coffee Break School Psychology. Welcome, Zaretta.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for having me.
So if y'all don't know Zaretta yet, you're in for a treat because she is the author of Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And she is a thought leader across the country about how to help students across the country, and particularly how to help educators advance equity in our schools. So I want to ask you, this is a coffee break channel. So do you have your coffee?
Oh, I do, but it's not in front of me. And because I'm already a little caffeinated, as you are about to find out, because I get really excited about this topic. So,
I'll allow it. I'll allow it. All right. Well, I have mine, and I'm glad you are caffeinated and ready to tell us a little bit about what you do. And then you're going to share three things that you think school psychs and educators really need to know about equity and social emotional learning, which of course is now always has been a thing, but now is trending as something that a lot of schools are starting to really understand that stressed out students can't learn. And so you haven't been advancing this for years, but go ahead and share a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll dive in.
I started my career as a educator, a teacher in the classroom. When I had my own classroom, I was a writing teacher. So I wasn't an English teacher who sprinkled in a little writing. My whole job was to make sure that the students that came into my classrooms, middle school, high school, and I did community college, composition as well, to make sure that they became really powerful expository writers. And I found that a lot of my students were coming in stressed, a lot of anxiety around their own capacity and competence as learners, and that has a whole emotional component. And so I learned firsthand that I needed to use social emotional techniques to help them kind of change internally, as well as culturally responsive practices to help them accelerate their learning. So I was able to really start to research and practice these. So I was challenged by a teacher a few years ago because I had been moved out of the classroom into coaching leaders, teacher leaders, instructional coaches around equity and accelerated learning. And it was funny because the techniques I was using, a teacher said, "You're just going to have to write this down. More people need to know about this." So I did eventually. And that's how I came to write the book. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go research some topics. This was my lived experience as a classroom teacher over a 5 year period to really understand that. And then I would take it out and sure enough, see how others were able to get their students to have a calmer, experience where their brain was ready to actually be stretched a little bit and stretched into that zone of proximal development. Here's the thing that I learned: that equity component really had this social emotional component, getting kids brain calm and ready, so those students that are the most vulnerable, black and brown kids, poor kids, English learners, really could get deep into their zone of proximal development and not trip up over the emotions that come with trying to expand their cognition. So that's what I'm all about, helping people really understand how these two go together, and making sure that they see that at the center of equity. Because here's the thing: only the learner learns. It's not about what we do to kids. This is not about having Motivation Monday or Thanksgiving Tuesday or, check in Wednesday, whatever, however, we're doing the packaged SEL program. And I see this so often. This is about different relationships with kids. And changing the nature of those relationships requires what I call a learning partnership. And within that partnership, we understand how the emotions of the brain play a role in cognition.
I think what you've said is so important, and this is your first point that I think really kind of brings it home for me, is that sometimes as school psychologists, we are perceived as ones who help do the testing, that's cognitive, and we look at social emotional. And then over here is SEL. It's a package, it's a curricula. And really, social emotional learning and cognition go together. And that's really the crux of your book. And I think is an excellent first point, which is we want to build learning partnerships, that the social emotional part of the brain is not separate from the cognitive part of the brain.
That's right. And being able to understand what does that look like. And within that learning partnership is what we call an alliance, meaning you as the provider, whether you're a teacher or you're in relationship with the student as a school psychologist, you are going to have to provide care and push. And so this is very different than, oh, we're just going to have a relationship. We're just going to be friendly, because if the student has a poor concept of self as a learner, part of our job is to help them actually level that concept up, right? To improve competence. Because here's the thing, competence precedes confidence. And a lot of times we think it's just about getting the kids' confidence up, just about motivating them. And this is the second tip. We have to move beyond kind of the grit growth mindset jargon we use, right? We say that we've got stuff plastered around the school, in classrooms, and we say these things to kids. But the reality is, we have to actually help that student reframe errors as information so that they are learning from it. And that's a hard thing if they're used to testing, grades, and a lot of us have focused on that. And so moving them beyond that becomes a really, really important point.
Yeah, I love that, care and push. I think that you're right, that we have all the posters that say, I haven't learned this yet. And I think growth mindset is a component, but at the same time, if the kids don't have the skills, then just saying, you'll get there. There's a difference. How would you say that school psychologists could help impart this message to teachers and parents and those that they work with who have sort of bought into this growth mindset is enough? It's really just about your attitude towards learning.
Yeah, I think that this is, something that school psychologists are uniquely positioned to do, because we are psychologists, right? I say the collective we, even though I am not a school psychologist. I do a lot of thinking about the brain science, right? And the science of learning. The more we can help people understand that error analysis, mistakes as information, are part of how people learn, then we will put it in a new position. Because when kids have a fixed mindset, whether they're high achievers or low achievers, they are freaked out about doing something different. The low achievers don't want this to confirm their low intelligence, so they just try to stay small and not, do much, and just, stay stuck. The high achievers don't want to stretch themselves because I'm already getting a B, I'm not going to risk it. So the fixed mindset even can be present there. When you show kids how to actually learn how to learn, meaning errors tell you something. What does error analysis look like? How are mistakes information? How do we celebrate them by actually looking at them? Like, one protocol I have folks use is the muddiest point. Just actually make time for kids' confusion and ask them, lift it up to high relief, not something to push under the rug and push away. So I think school psychologists play a really important role in helping people understand how learning happens, and educating themselves more around the science of learning, which is coming up, so that it can be communicated to folks, across the school site, teachers, other interventionists, and others that are supporting students, so that we're all helping the student really see that it is possible for me to grow the more I understand how I can change my learning moves.
I love that. And it's something that I say with kiddos all the time is like, that wasn't a failure, that was data. We have a data point about that study strategy did or didn't work, or that technique was or wasn't helpful, or when you were, feeling, upset, that did or didn't work for you to calm your brain back down and get back into the ready to learn zone. So it's not failure, it's just data. And school psychologists Love data. Our people, the royal we, love data. And so we can help not only kids understand that mistakes help you learn, but also that we are consultants with a variety of stakeholders and kids who you know, we want to advance equity, and we want to free up school psychologists to be those thought partners and consultants, because we're in the room a lot when kids are struggling.
Here's the thing I think is really an important role for school psychologists to play, and that is the messenger, right? So it's important in the moment to help students know the difference between failure as a bad thing and failure as a data point. But it has to go beyond, I'm going to tell this to one student. It literally has to be the culture of the school, and that therefore our actions reflect the fact that we are actually gathering these data points that are also called mistakes. We're celebrating them. We're doing postmortems on it. So someone has to champion that. And who better than the school psychologist to help people reframe the ways in which too often we fall into grading and testing? And this can be a place of despair for teachers. They don't like that. So, as the school psychologist is free from paperwork and, mindless testing, we now are in a position where we actually can spread this message of support. And what does that look like, as kind of an ethos within the school culture?
I think that's so critical because school psychologists are, and this is what we do all day long in the Thriving School Psychologist Collective, which is my online course and community, is we streamline and automate the bureaucracy and the report writing, and free up our time. So what do school psychologists do once they are no longer just test, IEP, meeting, repeat? They do tier 1 interventions, they do tier 2 interventions, they infuse SEL as an add in to the school culture, not like an add on during third period, right? We are messengers for the importance of social emotional learning. Is there any advice you have to school psychologists who are listening to this and like, okay, well, what's my first step? I want to be a lever for equity. I want to make sure all kids understand how they learn best and how social emotional and cognitive overlay. Is there any first steps you think that they should take?
I think the first step is to what I call assess current reality. Rather than immediately, I got to go in and change things, which can feel overwhelming. You really have to just step back, do your own gap analysis as to where there are things that are working to promote a sense of learning partnership and moving beyond, growth mindset, grit talk that is kind of superficial. Where are we helping students with their error analysis? So the three things I just talked about, just to step back. And how do you start with the sparks? Where do you actually grow that so that you can actually share it? How do you get with teachers who are actually doing something different and starting to gather momentum around other people wanting to do it? Because again, when we're trying to push in new practices, there can be resistance. And when we're trying to do that through a social emotional lens, it can feel to some teachers touchy feely. We've got to get the test scores up. We don't have time for this. The more you can help them understand that cognition and social emotional development go hand in hand, meaning if my brain has too much cortisol, there's no way I can learn this content. How do we get the brain calm and ready? How do we keep that intellectual curiosity open, right? And so I think the first step is just to assess current reality. Second step, get a group of teachers that are going to be instrumental in kind of spreading this kind of practice and message along with you. So it doesn't look like, oh, here she comes again talking about that, whatever, right? It's that you're able to do it. The third thing I would say is really get um, clear and educate yourself around the intersectionality of social emotional learning and development and equity. Dina Simmons, I think she talks about this really well. She does a lot of work around social emotional learning through an equity lens. And she says without that, it could be social emotional learning can be white supremacy with a hug, right? You're still coming at children with a deficit mindset, but now I'm just going to be friendly. that what we're really trying to do is upend the ways in which we settle into a pedagogy of compliance. And the only way to break out of that is to have the student be able to do a new thing, feeling competent and confident in their ability to do that. So again, assess current reality, see where there are the sparks to start with, not trying to convince people who don't want to buy into that, the resistant minority. Sometimes we give them more airtime than we should. And then being able to actually grow this capacity for the culture of the school to shift because it's actually happening in a few classrooms. And there's momentum behind kind of this positive feeling of seeing kids kind of blossom under that.
There was so many pearls of wisdom in what you just said. And I really hope folks out there listening are inspired to take those next steps. And I completely agree with you. Start where the momentum is there, and educate yourself. A great place to start is Zaretta's book. I have read it cover to cover many times, and it is called Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And you can get it on her website at www.crtandthebrain.com. Did I get it right?
Yeah, and that's where they can sign up for the newsletter. I put a monthly newsletter out. I just put one out today, and we talked about mental health and the intersectionality of mental health, trauma informed practice, and the need to be culturally responsive, right? That as school psychologists, we need those things too. So they can get the newsletter there. To get the book at Amazon, Corin press.com. Corn is a publisher. And definitely, I would love to have more folks talking about this aspect of the work in my community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, and having this conversation. It's such an important one to be having, particularly as school psychologists are freeing up their time to do more than just assess and be part of the movement in our schools to infuse lenses of equity into our social emotional work. And I just think your work is brilliant. And we have actually met in person over coffee in real time. And I really geeked out quite a lot on how school psychs could be levers for equity. And so I'm thrilled that you came and joined the coffee chat today. I am going to recaffeinate, and I am glad to have you. And folks, check out Zaretta Hammond's work. I will post the links below. She is a thought leader, and I'm so thrilled that you came. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.